Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the world has gone mad, that everyone around you is speaking the same lies, that the truth has become dangerous, and that reality itself seems to have been hijacked.
This is not science fiction. It's what happens when an entire society enters a state of collective psychosis. In this video, you will discover how fear transforms ordinary people into fanatics, why totalitarian regimes rise with popular support, the psychological mechanism that erases critical thinking, and most importantly, how to resist when the world goes insane. After this video, you will never look at society the same way again. If topics like psychology, philosophy, and the darkness of the human soul interest you, subscribe to the channel now. Imagine an entire society with eyes open but unable to see, people acting with conviction but without awareness, individuals who believe they are free but live under the rule of delusions. This is the essence of mass psychosis, a devastating psychic phenomenon where entire crowds drift away from reality and plunge into a world of shared illusions. It's not about individual madness. It's about mental contagion, a psychological fever that spreads through an entire population, corroding reason, erasing critical thinking, and replacing truth with manufactured narratives. But how is this possible? How does a seemingly sane mind adhere to absurdity? The answer lies in the invisible forces that shape the human psyche: fear, trauma, existential insecurity. In times of crisis, be it war, pandemic, or economic collapse, people don't seek truth, they seek relief. And when reality becomes unbearable, delusions become refuge. Thus, collective psychosis is born, a pathological reorganization of shared perception in which lies are accepted as faith and doubt becomes a crime. Carl Jung called this a psychic epidemic. For him, the greatest threat to humanity didn't come from earthquakes, diseases, or external wars, but from the unresolved chaos within the human mind. A society that abandons individual consciousness and surrenders to the emotional mass becomes a body without a soul, led by primitive impulses, herd instincts, and leaders who do not think, only inflame. In such moments, the pillars of civilization crack, morality dissolves, and the unthinkable becomes law. History won't let us forget. The witch hunts in Europe and America were not just episodes of hysteria. They were outbreaks of mass psychosis, where fear, combined with ignorance and religious propaganda, led entire communities to persecute, torture, and burn innocents. In the 20th century, totalitarian regimes like Nazism and Stalinism showed how entire populations can be enchanted by delusional ideologies, sincerely believing they were doing good while committing atrocities. These periods weren't system failures. They were the system in a psychotic state. But the most terrifying thing is this: a society in psychosis doesn't know it's sick. Just as a delusional individual believes he is lucid, a deranged civilization believes it is on the right path. It persecutes the sane as if they were mad. It exalts insane leaders as if they were saviors. And the deeper the psychosis, the more violent its reaction to those who dare to question it. That's why mass psychosis is so dangerous. Not because it destroys bodies, but because it destroys minds, and with them, the very possibility of returning to sanity. In times of apparent normality, the civilized man wears his mask. He speaks politely, works, consumes, behaves. But this civilization is a thin layer of varnish, and beneath it, the wolf lives. An archaic, primitive animal force. When the structures that hold this veneer begin to crack, when fear, chaos, and uncertainty take hold, the wolf awakens. And he doesn't awaken alone. He awakens in May at once. That's how a collective psychosis begins. Not with tanks in the streets, but with silent tremors in the human soul. It all starts with panic, a diffuse but deep fear, a collapse of meaning. It can follow an economic crisis, a war, a pandemic, or any real or fabricated threat that rips away people's sense of stability. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet disappears, and the human being, unable to tolerate the anguish of not knowing, desperately seeks any narrative that offers psychological relief. In that moment, truth matters less than the feeling of control. And that's where delusion enters, not as individual madness, but as a distorted collective salvation. Psychiatrist Silvano Arieti described this process as a sequence. First, the state of panic. The individual feels threatened by forces he doesn't understand. Then, the psychotic insight, a false but comforting interpretation of reality, a new myth, a simplified explanation, an ideology. It reorganizes the inner world, not based on facts, but on what soothes the anxiety. This is crucial. Psychosis is not a fall into disorder, but a desperate attempt to impose order where meaning has collapsed. And when many adopt the same illusion, it becomes culture. This psychic collapse, when shared, spreads like a virus. Emotions become contagious. Hysteria becomes the norm. The irrational, a moral duty. The crowd becomes a unified emotional organism, regressed, infantilized. People stop thinking and start repeating. And the most terrifying part, they believe they are awake. They don't realize they're living in a theater of delusions, where facts are manipulated, enemies are imaginary, and heroes are merely tyrants with different names. As Jung wrote, when a society abandons symbolic life, it becomes easy prey for any irrational ideology. And here is the crucial point. This psychosis is not imposed, it is desired. It offers the tired soul a promise of redemption, an external enemy to fight, a cause to believe in, a new identity. Suffering now has purpose. Pain now has a culprit. That's why entire crowds embrace it with open arms, even when the price to pay is their own freedom. The wolf inside man doesn't just want to escape. He wants a leader who gives him permission to howl. And when that happens, no law, ethic, or logic can stop him. Collective madness is not a modern invention. It is as old as man himself. If we want to understand the dangers we face today, we need to look at the moments when entire societies abandoned reason, surrendering to panic and irrationality as if it were a form of spiritual salvation. These dark episodes are etched in history as forgotten warnings, signs of what happens when fear becomes culture and doubt a crime. One of the most disturbing examples occurred between the 16th and 17th centuries, during the infamous witch hunts in Europe and America. In villages ravaged by hunger, war, and disease, collective anxiety reached unbearable levels. And to relieve it, the people found a convenient scapegoat: women. Old women, healers, loners, anyone who deviated from the norm was accused of a demonic pact. Thousands were tortured and killed, not for their crimes, but for the psychic need of a society to externalize its own evil. It was institutionalized madness, supported by churches, kings, and judges. When delusion becomes law, sanity is a crime. Centuries later, insanity returned in a new guise, more organized, more dangerous, more efficient. In the 20th century, totalitarian regimes like Nazism and Soviet communism turned ideological delusions into systems of government. Millions were led to believe that the enemy was the neighbor, the Jew, the bourgeois, the dissident, the impure. Propaganda replaced thought, fear replaced dialogue, and death replaced justice. As Hannah Arendt wrote, totalitarianism not only oppresses, it tries to transform human nature itself, eliminating the individual, the creative, the spontaneous, everything that threatens absolute power. These events did not arise out of nowhere. They were not the product of charismatic tyrants alone. They sprang from the fertile soil of collective fear, watered by anxiety, cultivated by years of uncertainty. The people wanted to believe, wanted to obey, wanted someone to free them from doubt, even if it meant sacrificing freedom, morality, and even reality. Collective psychosis, like any epidemic, needs vectors. And its vectors are pain, disinformation, and isolation. When these three align, madness spreads. The most terrifying thing, however, is not that this has happened before. It's that the symptoms are here now. Social media turns algorithms into oracles. Truth becomes relative. The other is automatically an enemy. Leaders offer simplistic solutions to complex problems. Fear is in the air. And the question that remains is, Are we on the brink of another psychic epidemic? Or worse, are we already inside it, but cannot see it because everyone around us is blind as well? History tells us that collective psychosis does not announce its arrival with an alarm. It seeps in like fog, subtle, silent, and by the time we realize it, we are no longer thinking with our own minds. Comment below, I resist madness, if from today on you decide to leave the collective psychosis and take back control of your mind and your life. All insanity begins with a single choice: fear or truth. You don't need an army to start a collective psychosis. You don't need a dictator, nor a war. All it takes is fear, constant fear, repeated fear, fear without form and without end. Madness begins slowly, like a low fever. First, we feel that something is wrong. Then, we seek explanations, and when they don't come, we invent them. When reality becomes unbearable, delusion seems like a form of healing. But this healing has a price. We lose control of our own mind. Silvano Arieti, a renowned psychiatrist of the 20th century, closely observed this process. He identified the cycle of madness in 3 stages. First, the state of panic. The mind begins to perceive the world as hostile, incomprehensible, threatening. What once made sense now seems strange. Anxiety seeps in like poison. This is where the collapse begins. When mental pain becomes unbearable, the brain seeks refuge in alternative narratives, even if false, even if absurd, because they offer meaning. The second stage is the so-called psychotic insight, a kind of distorted revelation. The individual or society finds a new logic to explain all that cannot be understood. It is a delusional logic, a parallel reality constructed to protect the ego from collapse. Here, facts and fiction merge. The truth no longer matters. Only the internal coherence of the delusion does. And the more intense the pain, the stronger the attachment to the lie. Psychosis, at this point, is no longer a disease. It is a shield. But the most frightening thing is that this individual process multiplies when reproduced en masse. Imagine millions of minds suffering together, all anxious, all isolated, all seeking answers. Now add to that a media system that feeds panic, leaders who promote fear, and a population connected by algorithms that amplify despair. What was once an individual collapse becomes an epidemic of perception, a shared insanity, a socially sanctioned delusion, and at this point enters menticide, the murder of the mind. Just as Mahler, psychiatrist and author of The Rape of the Mind, warned that totalitarian regimes don't need to destroy bodies, only the capacity to think. Menticide begins with confusion, feeds on repetition, and grows stronger with isolation. It is the systematic use of fear and propaganda to erase the distinction between reality and narrative. Gradually, the population stops thinking for itself and begins repeating the imposed beliefs like mantras. This is the origin of collective madness. We don't go insane all at once. We give up consciousness step by step. In exchange for security, we surrender freedom. In the name of order, we accept control. And deep down, what we desire is not truth, but comfort. But as Jung warned, comfort may come from the shadow. And when the shadow takes over, civilization becomes ill. If you want to keep seeing what many refuse to see, subscribe now. Here, truth is not comfortable, but it sets you free. Collective delusion needs a structure, and that structure has a name: totalitarianism. Collective madness, when not contained, does not remain diffuse for long. It finds a form, a body, a system, and that form, highly organized, seductive, destructive, is totalitarianism. Contrary to what many think, totalitarian regimes do not arise solely from the desire for power of the leaders, but from the psychological collapse of the masses. The people, already immersed in fear and confusion, no longer want freedom. They want order, even if that order comes chained to tyranny. Historian Arthur Versluis defines totalitarianism as the modern specialization of a centralized, absolute, omnipresent state power, one that not only governs bodies, but tries to shape minds. And this is its fundamental difference from other forms of domination. Totalitarianism demands obedience not only in behavior, but in thought. It wants domesticated souls, standardized consciences, predictable emotions. And for that, it needs to kill the individual. Under totalitarian regimes, society is divided between those who govern and those who are governed. But both groups become sick. The rulers are elevated to an almost divine status, infallible, messianic, absolute figures. This deification serves not only to generate authority, but to hide corruption and human flaws under the veil of myth. The masses, meanwhile, are infantilized. They become dependent, submissive, lacking direction. The inner adult is replaced by an obedient and fearful child. Collective psychosis then becomes institutionalized. Menticide becomes official policy. The state defines what is truth, what is science, what is right and wrong. Language is corrupted, symbols are inverted, and critical thinking is treated as a crime. Citizens not only conform, they are conditioned to love their chains. Propaganda does not only serve to deceive, but to create an alternative reality where questioning is dangerous and obedience is a virtue. And this is where the cycle completes. Totalitarianism, while born of collective psychosis, also perpetuates it. It feeds on the same source that created it: fear, isolation, confusion, disinformation. And by keeping the masses in a constant state of alertness and vulnerability, it ensures its longevity. Like a parasite that controls the host brain, totalitarianism turns entire societies into puppets of a single narrative. And thus, delusion ceases to be just a mistake and becomes law. But behind every totalitarianism, there is a hidden price. It destroys creativity, suffocates spontaneity, and annihilates the human soul. It turns life into survival and thought into silence. What seemed like a way out of chaos reveals itself as a prison adorned with promises. And when the shackles finally tighten enough, many realize too late that the real enemy was never out there, but within us, in the fear we chose not to face. When sanity becomes the rule, sanity becomes rebellion. If a mass psychosis can turn societies into mental prisons, then resisting it becomes more than a duty. It becomes a form of spiritual survival. But how do you challenge a madness that presents itself as truth? How do you remain sane in a world that calls lucidity heresy? The answer begins within each individual, because collective psychosis only spreads when individual minds give up on themselves. The first step, as Carl Jung taught, is to bring order to your own mind. He who does not master himself will inevitably be dominated by something or someone else. In times of chaos, the greatest act of resistance is to live consciously, cultivate reflection, question the impulse to follow the majority, relearn how to be silent, not out of fear, but to hear what is within. The world outside may be collapsing, but a centered mind becomes a beacon of stability. But resisting alone is not enough. Lucidity must be spread like fire in a dark forest. This means confronting propaganda with truth, sharing ideas, data, arguments. Lies need censorship to survive. Truth does not. And that is precisely why psychotic regimes fear freedom of expression, because a single lucid voice can awaken hundreds of sleeping minds. Every idea that refuses to die is a spark that defies darkness. Another powerful tool against totalitarianism is humor. Laughter may seem fragile, but in the face of a regime that takes itself too seriously, it is a nuclear weapon. The dictator, the demagogue, the prophet of lies, they all hate to be ridiculed. Humor disarms them, reveals their fragility, destroys their aura. As Václav Havel, a dissident of the communist regime, said, "Totalitarian power cannot withstand the mockery of naked reality." Finally, one of the most effective forms of resistance is the creation of parallel structures. Groups, communities, and networks, art, culture, everything that promotes autonomy, freedom, and truth outside the oppressive system. These islands of sanity may seem small, but they are seeds of a new world. Because totalitarianism depends on isolation and obedience. Where there is connection and courage, it weakens. And when these networks grow large enough, a new culture emerges, a culture of consciousness. Resisting mass psychosis is not just saying no to collective delusion. It is saying yes to truth, to freedom, and to individual responsibility. It is refusing the comfort of the herd to embrace the loneliness of lucidity. It is becoming the flame amid darkness. And even if we are few, even if we are ridiculed, history has always belonged to those who dared to see what others refused to. In times of universal deceit, telling the truth becomes a revolutionary act. George Orwell, we have reached the darkest and most decisive point of this journey. After understanding what mass psychosis is, how it begins, how it dominates, and how it spreads, only one final question remains. And now, madness has already begun to set in. The structures are corrupted, reality has been bent, and each of us stands before a silent fork in the road, to keep sleeping or to awaken. Awakening will not come by chance. It requires a choice, and that choice is deeply painful, because it is not just about saying no to the lie. It is about losing status, breaking ties, being ridiculed, isolated. It is about dying socially, in a certain sense, to be reborn as someone who belongs to the real, not to the collective illusion. It is a path for the few, but it is the only path that leads to freedom. We can no longer wait for saviors. The era of redeemers is over. We live in times when each man and woman must become their own guardian of the truth, not to impose a new doctrine, but to keep alive a flame that insists on burning, even when the whole world blows against it. Freedom is not given. It is conquered at every moment with vigilance, courage, and sacrifice. And perhaps this is the greatest paradox of our time. In a world where everything is permitted, almost no one is truly free. Because freedom is not doing everything you want. It is having the strength not to do what everyone else does. It is saying no when the whole world says yes. It is looking absurdity in the eyes and not flinching. It is feeling fear and not surrendering to it. So, what remains for you, who made it this far? Only one choice. Between the safety of collective madness or the risk of individual lucidity. Between being just one more in the crowd or becoming the breaking point. Between kneeling before comfortable delusions or rising for the dignity of being a thinking being. The world does not need more followers. The world needs sparks. In the end, the question that echoes is simple, yet relentless. Will you have the courage to remain sane? In a world that has gone mad, the choice is yours. And it begins now. Some may think this was the end, but beware, the war is not over yet. There are still things that have not been said. These two videos in front of you are not here by accident. And what if everything you believe about yourself is just a reflection of someone else's gaze? Click now on one of the videos beside and start breaking that mirror. You'll have to risk the click. So, which one will you choose? Here, philosophy meets psychology, and together, we'll uncover the deepest layers of the self. Turn on the bell, because the next episodes will challenge you and maybe even transform you. See you in the darkness or in the light. The choice is yours.